A phone rang 6,000 miles from the hand that dialed it. Harry's voice crossed the Atlantic with the urgency of a son who still believes his father's word. He called more than once. Multiple calls, at hours shaped by the time difference. For Harry, it was late morning. For his father, it was the edge of evening. Each call carried the same request. He wanted to see his father. He wanted the meeting to be private. Charles gave him the word, private. That syllable traveled 6,000 miles through fiber and satellite. It landed in a house in the English countryside where it would be tested against a room and found empty. The calls had the quality of someone pushing against bureaucracy to reach a person he should be able to reach directly. Harry was not calling a mobile phone ringing on a nightstand. He was calling through layers of private secretaries and diary managers. These are the people who stand between a king and anyone who wants to reach him, including his own children. Each call required patience. Each connection required navigating an institution that treats even family contact as an event to be scheduled, vetted, and managed. A son should be able to call his father. This son cannot. He calls a system. The system decides when and whether the call connects. The word private had to pass through the same institutional layers that made privacy impossible. It traveled from Charles through a private secretary to a scheduling office and back through diplomatic channels to California. By the time Harry received it, the word had passed through people whose job is to ensure that nothing a king promises goes unmanaged. The word arrived in California still sounding like a father's guarantee. It was already an institutional product. Charles gave the word, private. Harry received it as what it was supposed to be. A father's guarantee. His father wanted to see him. His father would make the space. The meeting would belong to the two of them alone. That was the understanding. That was the fuel for what came next. Harry flew from California. The crossing takes 11 hours. Every one of those hours was powered by the word his father had spoken. Private. It was the reason a man who had every justification to stay home packed a bag instead. He pointed himself toward a country that had given him little reason to return. 11 hours is a long time to sit with a word. It is long enough to rehearse every version of a conversation. Long enough to imagine your father's face and wonder whether it will hold warmth or formality. Long enough to wonder if the word will hold. Long enough to decide that it will. The alternative is to stay home. Staying home means accepting that your father's word is not worth 11 hours of flight. Harry boarded the plane. The word was worth the flight. He was certain. He carried certainty the way you carry something fragile in your hands, carefully, aware that it could break, choosing to believe it would not. 11 hours is also long enough to feel hope settle into something that resembles certainty. The word was given. The word was private. What else does a son need besides a word that means what it says? He landed in England carrying the promise. His father's word that what happened at Highgrove would belong only to them. The drive from the airport passes through English countryside designed to reassure, green fields, stone walls, the particular tidiness of a landscape managed for centuries. Harry would have watched it through the car window with his mind already ahead of him, already in the room, already sitting across from the person he traveled 6,000 miles to see. The fields passed, the hedgerows blurred. The car turned onto the narrow road that leads to the Highgrove estate. The distance between hope and arrival shrank to minutes, then to meters, then to a door. The door at Highgrove opened. Harry stepped through. Camilla was already seated. Her chair was positioned in the room where the meeting would take place. In the room, seated, settled. She arrived early because arriving early establishes that your presence is a condition of the encounter. Her posture held the stillness of a decision already made. Her hands rested in her lap with the composure of someone who is not anxious because she is not the one who traveled. She was not the one who carried a word across an ocean. She was the one who would break it. The word private died in the doorway. It died in the space between Harry's step across the threshold and his recognition that the room held three bodies. The witness chair was occupied before the reunion began. Whatever Charles intended when he spoke that syllable into the phone, the intention landed in a room already occupied. Camilla's body in that room was the physical refutation of the word. Harry's body would have registered the sight before his mind caught up. The slight stop in the step, the recalculation that happens behind the eyes when what you expected and what you find do not match. The involuntary tightening of the jaw. He had crossed an ocean for a word. The word was already broken when he entered its room. 6,000 miles of travel, 11 hours of flight, multiple calls through palace switchboards. All of it delivered him to a room that contained the one person whose presence made the word meaningless. The cruelty was not in the witness. The cruelty was in the journey. Every mile Harry traveled gave the broken promise more weight. No photographs were taken during the meeting. That absence is its own confession. When you forbid cameras, you are admitting that the image would be a problem. The institution understood that the visual would look like what it was. A son facing his father across a room that should have been empty. A witness seated to one side. No press office could manage that image. No caption could soften it. So no photograph was permitted. The absence of a camera was the institution admitting what it had done while refusing to create evidence of it. 1 hour. That was the duration. 60 minutes of supervised conversation between a father and a son who had flown 6,000 miles. The word that powered his journey was dead before the first sentence. Palace set conditions governed the encounter. The duration was determined in advance. The participants were determined in advance. The witness was determined in advance. The promise, Charles's spoken word to his own son, was being tested against the room, and the room was failing it. Charles sat with Harry while Camilla occupied the space that made conversation institutional. Every sentence between father and son was heard by a third person. Camilla did not need to interrupt. She did not need to speak at all. She did not need to adjust her expression. Her presence was the intervention. It changed the air in the room. It changed the way sentences were formed before they were spoken. A conversation meant for two voices carried 3 sets of ears. The third set belonged to the person with the most to lose if father and son found their way back to each other. Time moves differently in a supervised conversation. It thickens. Words come out pre-edited, filtered through awareness that someone is committing them to memory. Pauses carry weight. The small gestures that belong to privacy cannot survive a witness. A hand reaching across a table. A voice dropping to say something meant for one person only. Those gestures die in the presence of a third body, the way certain plants die in frost. They require an atmosphere that the room no longer held. The room itself seemed to understand the situation. Summer light came through tall windows. Old wood and furniture polish gave the air the scent of a house maintained by staff for generations. The carpet absorbed footsteps. The curtains filtered July sun into a golden wash that made everything look warm. Nothing in the room felt warm to the son who had traveled 6,000 miles for a word that no longer existed. Harry sat in a chair that was not his. Charles sat in a chair that was his but somehow was not. Between them, the air carried every word to the woman whose chair should have been empty. During the hour, Camilla told Harry the door was closed forever. The witness had become the judge. The person positioned to observe had spoken the sentence that defined the outcome. The institutional presence had become the institutional voice. That voice said there was no path back. The woman who was not supposed to be in the room delivered the only verdict it would produce. For a son who crossed an ocean on his father's word, that sentence carried a weight beyond rejection. Rejection can be fought. A closed door can be knocked on again. A door declared permanently sealed by someone who was never part of the original conversation, that carries its own cruelty. It is authority from a chair that should have been empty. The verdict was spoken by someone who had no standing to deliver it, and every power to enforce it. The door that was supposedly closed was not Harry's door. It was not even Charles's door. It was Camilla's, and she closed it from a chair the word private should have kept empty. Harry asked to speak with his father alone. The request filled the room the way a clear note fills a cathedral. It was the simplest version of what the word had guaranteed, just the two of them. Father and son, without the witness who had converted reunion into tribunal. Harry asked. The room held still. Charles hesitated. The hesitation lived on his face. It occupied the space between hearing and responding. For a genuine, terrible moment, it appeared Charles might ask Camilla to step outside. His posture shifted forward. His mouth began to form a sentence that would have reclaimed the word he gave his son. His hands moved toward a gesture of authority. The room balanced on the edge of privacy. Every person in it could feel the possibility hovering. For those seconds, the room held its breath. Privacy was close enough to touch. He did not ask. The moment dissolved the way a held breath dissolves when someone exhales and settles back. Charles returned to his supervised posture. The institutional weight that entered with Camilla's chair pressed the possibility flat. That almost private moment cut deeper than the supervised hour. It proved Charles could see privacy. He could feel its shape hovering in the room. He could sense the word he had given Harry, waiting to be honored. He could not close his hand around it in his own house. A king who cannot deliver a single syllable of privacy in a house that belongs to him is not a king in that room. He is a resident of an institution that has furnished the house with conditions he did not choose. The crown gives him the title. The institution takes the word. The trait is visible only in moments like this. A son asks for something simple. A father cannot provide it. The simplicity of the request is what makes the failure so visible. Harry did not ask for a policy change. He did not ask for a public statement. He asked his father to ask his wife to leave the room for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The king could not deliver 5 minutes. The hour ended. The conditions were met. The institution's requirements were satisfied. Whatever Charles and Harry said in those 60 minutes exists only in their memories and in whatever Camilla carried from the room in hers. Then Charles walked his son to the car. The front door of Highgrove opened onto a July evening. Warm air carried the scent of cut grass from the gardens. That green smell English summers make before the light turns golden. The air was soft, with the temperature of a day cooling toward gentleness. Gravel crunched under 2 pairs of shoes, 2 pairs only. No third set of footsteps followed them through the door. They walked the drive together. The gravel was pale gray, the kind that announces arrivals and departures with sound. Each step marked itself. Gravel shifted and settled. No institutional presence accompanied them. No witness chair. No conditions drawn up by a communications office. A father and a son walking side by side toward a parked car. Their shadows stretched long in the low light. The evening air held that quality of English summer that makes every color richer and every sound clearer. Somewhere in the garden, a wood pigeon called and received no answer. Charles's hand found the car door handle and rested there. The metal held the warmth of evening sun. His fingers stayed on the handle without pulling. You hold something that way when opening it means releasing something else. The light was low and golden. Long shadows reached from the house across the drive. In that light, the two of them stood in the only unwitnessed moment of the visit. No one was listening. No one was cataloging pauses or filing sentences for later use. The gardens smelled of grass and the sweetness of whatever flowered along the drive. A bird moved in the hedge. The house stood behind them, holding its supervised rooms. For 90 seconds, none of it reached the two men at the car door. The air held only their breathing and the faint sound of gravel settling under their weight. This was what private felt like. This gravel, this silence, this air between a father and his son with no one else breathing it. 90 seconds, perhaps less, of the privacy that should have filled an hour. The car park delivered what the drawing room could not. Charles opened the door, Harry got in. A father's hand lingered on the doorframe. His fingers rested on the metal with the slowness of someone whose body knows what his mouth will not say. The man who could not deliver privacy inside his own house had found it in a gravel car park. It lasted for the time it takes to walk 40 feet. Privacy, tested against an hour of supervision and found hollow, survived only in 90 seconds of gravel and evening air The walk was the punishment. It proved Charles understood the texture of the word he gave Harry. He knew what privacy sounded like. 2 sets of footsteps on gravel and silence. He knew what it felt like. Warm air and no one watching. He knew what it smelled like. Cut grass and the end of a July day. The supervised hour was a reality he permitted. A father who walks his son to a car in perfect solitude knows what privacy feels like. A father who releases that son into an evening he cannot follow knows what he failed to provide. The knowing is the punishment. Harry drove away carrying a specific understanding. His father wanted to mean the word. He could feel it. He could walk inside it for 90 seconds. He could hold its shape on a gravel drive while the light turned gold. His father simply could not command it. The word that traveled 6,000 miles was real when Charles spoke it. It was honest. It was no longer his to keep. The institution he leads had repossessed the word before Harry's plane touched English soil. Caring and failing is worse than indifference. Indifference is clean. It asks nothing of the person who receives it. A father who does not care cannot disappoint. A father who cares but cannot act leaves a wound that understanding cannot close. He feels privacy in his fingertips on a car door handle. He cannot carry it indoors. The gap between feeling and delivering is where the wound lives. Harry understood that gap. Understanding did not help. The conditions were decided before Harry landed. The witness chair was occupied before the calls ended. Every arrangement was final before the word was tested. Harry's urgent calls were calls into a settled outcome. The word was broken before it was tested. Charles gave his son something he no longer owned. The promise, spoken across an ocean, believed across 11 hours of flight, was broken by a chair occupied before the door opened. It is no longer a word Charles can give. Highgrove's front door closing. Charles inside the house. The gravel drive empty in evening light. A single set of tire tracks leading